We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph and Meseches Rosh Hashana. This is Rosh Hashana Daf 33a. The Mishnah said, "Ve'in chotchen oso bein bedavar shu misham shavus, uvein bedavar shu misham lo saseh." It said you're not allowed to cut the shofar, whether you're cutting it in a fashion where normally on Yontiv it would be an Isser D'Rabbanan, whether you're cutting it in a fashion where normally on Yontiv that would be an Isser D'Oraisa. In either situation, you're not allowed to cut the shofar in that fashion on Yontiv. Rashi over here says, "Ve'in chotchen oso in bol sakno lo bedavar shu misham shavus, kli she'ein darko lachtoch bo shofaris." In other words, what would be an example of an Isser D'Rabbanan? Let's say you have a vessel that you normally don't cut a shofar with that. Kagon magla, for example, a sickle. Tetikun kila achar yadhu, that's considered fixing it, but in an abnormal fashion. Ve'ein bo ela misham shavus, that would only be an Isser D'Rabbanan. And the Gemara now says, misham shavus, what's an example of cutting it with something where it's only cutting it in a fashion that's asur midrabbanan? Magla, like we just said, that's cutting it with a sickle. Lo saseh, what's an example of cutting it in a way where it's an Isser lo saseh? An example would be sakina if you use a knife. Rashi over here says, Sakina didarko bekach, it's normal to fix a shofar with a knife. V'havi malacha gemura, that would be considered a malacha gemura. It would be a full malacha of fixing this kli, or in this case, fixing the shofar. So the Gemara says, Hashta misham shvus amrit lo sasemi. Boy, if you already said you're not allowed to do an Isser D'Rabbanan to fix the shofar in order to fulfill the mitzvah, do I even need to say you're not allowed to do a lo saseh? Of course. It's a kal v'chomer. If I can't violate a D'Rabbanan, I certainly cannot violate a D'Oraisa. And so the Gemara answers, Zuva in sarach lo marzu katani. The Mishnah just means you can't do this, and of course you can't do that. You can't do an Isser D'Rabbanan, and of course you cannot do an Isser D'Oraisa. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, if you want to put water or wine in the shofar, that's in order to make it produce a clearer sound, that is okay to do on Yontif. So the Gemara says, Mayim o yayin in meraglayim lo. It sounds like you're allowed to use water or wine, but you're not allowed to use urine. The Gemara says, Masnis and Moni Abba Shaul. He who's the author of our Mishnah. The Mishnah follows the opinion of Abba Shaul. The Tanya, because we learned in a Brisa, Abba Shaul Omer, Abba Shaul says, Mayim o yayin mutter. If you have water or wine, it's mutter kadei letzach in order to have it produce a clear sound. Meiraglayim asur mipnei hakavod. But if you're going to use urine, that's already prohibited. That's asur because that's not proper respect for the shofar. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Ein ma'akvin es hatinokos miliskoa. We don't stop the children from blowing shofar. In other words, they're encouraged to blow shofar so they can learn how to do it. So the Gemara says, Hanashim ma'akvin. The implication is that women, we would hold them back from blowing shofar, that we would not encourage them to blow shofar on Yontif. But the Gemara says, Vatanya, but we learned in a Brisa the opposite. Ein ma'akvin, lo es hanashim, v'lo es hatinokos miliskoa b'Yontif. We don't hold back the women or the children from blowing shofar on Yontif. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya. Abaya says, Lo kash, it's not difficult. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon. In one case, it's following the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. In the other case, it's following the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon. The Tanyas, we learned in a Brisa, Daber el Bnei Yisrael. Pasuk says, speak to Bnei Yisrael. And we learn from this particular Pasuk, Bnei Yisrael somchen, that Bnei Yisrael, meaning males, can do smicha. When you bring a carbon, you rest your hands upon the top of the animal. That's done by men. Ve'ein Bnos Yisrael somchos, but it's not a mitzvah for women to do that. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Omrim, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say, Noshim somchos reshus, that even though it's not an obligation for women to do it, they can do it as a reshus, they can do it voluntarily. And Rashi over here explains, Bnei Yisrael somchen, Daber Bnei Yisrael v'yamarta aleihem, Adam ki yakrav mikem, uchsib ba'winyan v'samach yado, right there in that area where it talks about Bnei Yisrael, so it also talks about the idea of smicha. And so the second opinion in the Brisa was, the opinion of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon was, Somchos Rishus, that women can do it voluntarily. Alma afagav de patrin hukra. You see, even though they're pater from it, like a isura, there's no isur. V'hu adin lemitzvah saseh shazman grama. The same thing is true by a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, even though they're not obligated in the mitzvah of shofar, because it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, but still they can do it. It's no prohibition. Now, what prohibition is Rashi talking about? We have to look back at Rashi over here. Rashi says, Hanashim ma'akvin de pturos legamri. They're pater by shofar. The mitzvah saseh shazman gramahu v'chitaki ika bal tosif. Rashi even says, if it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, it's possible that if they do blow shofar, that would be an isser about tosif. So Rashi is saying, according to the opinion, somchos reshus, that the women, even though they're not obligated in smicha, they can do it voluntarily, so it's not an isser. So the same thing would be true by shofar, even though it's a mitzvah saseh shazman grama, they're not chayiv in it, it's not going to be a problem if they blow the shofar. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, quoting the Mishnah, Aval Misaskin bohem ad sheyilmedu. You're allowed to encourage them to blow the shofar so that they can learn how to do it. This is talking about the children. So the Gemara says, Amar Rebbe Elazar says, afilu b'Shabbos. This is not only true on Yontif, this is even true on Shabbos. You can encourage them to blow shofar on Shabbos so that they learn how to blow the shofar. The Gemara says, Tanya nami hachi. We have a brisa that supports this as well. Misaskin bohen ad sheyilmedu afilu b'Shabbos. You can encourage them to do it, that they should learn how to do it even on Shabbos. Ve'in ma'akvin hatinokos miliskoa b'Shabbos. Ve'in tzarich lomer b'Yontif. And we don't hold back the children from blowing shofar on Shabbos, and certainly we don't hold them back from doing it on Yontif. But the Gemara notes, Hagufa Kasha, the line itself seems to be internally contradictory. Because Amrit misaskin b'henat sheyilmedu v'afilu b'Shabbos. First, you're saying like you encourage them to do it even on Shabbos. Alma lechatchila amrinon tiku. Sounds like we even tell them to do it. It's something we want them to do lechatchila. V'hadar tana. But then it says ein ma'akvin. We don't hold them back from doing it. Ikuvahu delo ma'akvin. It sounds like we don't hold them back. Halechatchila lo amrinon tiku. But we don't actually tell them they should do this. It's just if they're doing it, we don't stop them. So which one is it? Are we encouraging them actively to do it, or are we just not holding them back? And so to that the Gemara says, lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan over here in this situation. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Beis.